Hi, welcome. Good morning, everyone. And we're excited to be here today for the second day of the Future of Media. And I'm honoured to be here this morning with such a great panel who are going to be covering quite a tricky topic. I'm just going to ask, is my mic okay? Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay. Brilliant. So I can't even tell it. Anyway, fine.
This one. Oh, really?
There we are.
Whack
I don't want to deafen everyone like before 9 a.m. I feel like that's harsh. So in terms of what we're here to talk about, I think there's been no escaping on the news that the macro financial situation is frankly rather terrifying. Particularly, I know I spoke to a few people beforehand just buying houses or and moving house and things like that. So there's a huge amount of pressure on us as individuals. And bigger than that, as of the figures yesterday, it seems like in the UK at least we are inching closer to recession. And that puts pressure on media. And so the title of this is really with winter is coming, and can media companies compete with these deep pockets of big tech? So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Cadi Jones. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Qmee, which is part of Kantar. And I'm going to just ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves very briefly.
Great. Well, I get the honor of starting first. Welcome. Good morning. My name is Lauren Walker. I am the MD for our data and analytics practice within Accenture Song, which was recently rebranded from Accenture Interactive. And what I'm excited to talk about today is because I was at the Dentsu International for 4 years before joining Accenture Song about a year ago. So being able to see it from both sides, and look forward to sharing how the media agency world's evolving today.
Morning everyone, my name is Paul. I am Digital Development Director for The Sun at News UK.
Hi Paul. Hi guys, Neil Robinson, Customer Transformation Director at Salesforce. I've had about 26 years in media here, the US and APAC, and in e-commerce as well. And I'm really looking forward to this particular subject based on the fact that we have an opportunity to really invest in the future of independent media, and I firmly believe it, and I'm really hoping we can have that discussion about what we need to do to make sure independent media survives.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Paterson. I am the head of news at The News Movement, which is a new startup working in the news space, bringing quality journalism to Gen Z audiences on social. I'm very proud to say we had our US launch yesterday, which you may have read about in the Times, which was great to have that write-up. But we're navigating this as any startup would, navigating this space. So very interested in talking about it today.
Well, brilliant. And hopefully you can hear me all a bit better now that I have a working mic. So I want to kick this off actually with you, Neil, but I hope we'll hear from everyone. But just to think about what can stop, or what stops a media organisation from growing.
Yeah, so I've got two perspectives on this, and the first is from my current position as Customer Transformation Director. So we deal with a lot of media companies, and the commonality and problem, it's very easy to understand what's stopping legacy businesses or businesses that have been around for a while growing, and I'll bucket them up into probably three areas. One is they become way too complicated. Years and years of M&A, years and years of bolting on bits of their business. It's just caused friction in their ability to move at the speed of culture, which is kind of what they're there to do to serve their customers. So there's a complexity issue based on just, probably mismanaged integration of their businesses as they have grown. So that's a blocker. The second one's probably more about an internal alignment, and you see this time and time and again. And in transformation, yes, technology is one part of transformation, but people's the most critical part of transformation. And the internal alignment that isn't there in sort of some organizations is, again, a massive friction point and preventing them from scaling or growing, whether it's KPIs, whether it's competing succession-like agendas. Any of that stuff is just stopping growth. And I think the third one is really, really basic, and we all know it, but it's really hard to deliver, is actually putting customers at the center of your organization. It's almost that you forget the purpose of why you're there to serve the consumers, because you're totally focused on internal stuff. and you kind of forget the customer experience or the employee experience or the people that actually build value for your business. So I think that's my 3 takes, and I'm going to land it on the shoulders of leadership, because I think leadership failing to recognize those friction points in an org are failing their customers and failing their businesses. So it needs to relook at instead of functional transformation, it really needs to look at totally connected enterprise transformation, and that takes bold leadership.
So having been in my last role at Dentsu International, I was a COO, which as a data person who usually is helping create data strategies, it was an interesting opportunity. But I was asked to help in one ways, in the way I met Yalda and Neil, was rolling out our Salesforce CRM platform, because we were just using loads of spreadsheets. So we really didn't understand how our clients were segmented. We didn't understand the profitability very well. So we went through this whole process of, we have all these new business teams out there doing work, but they're kind of in separate spreadsheets, and we had a very local CEOs ran their own markets totally autonomously, and so trying to cover global clients was really difficult, but also introducing a process that then had oversight was also not really something people enjoyed, because they'd gone from a bit of autonomy and anonymity. So on that side, that was fascinating. The other side that we did, aside from like kind of trying to improve technical processes, was the operating model, as you said. So our management said we actually have to streamline, and so we went from plus 100 brands just in the UK alone down to essentially 3 main brands, actually 6 and now 3, and then now that I'm at Accenture Song, we recently, with David Droga as our CEO, just did the same thing. Loads of agencies that we purchased. Now everyone's assimilated to the Accenture Song. So there is a lot, I think, that's happened across the other big holdcos as well, to say, how do we simplify, how do we unify around this one brand, and try to find ways where we group people by skills and also by clients with more transparency and data. So that would be like the 2 sides. So you have to have that confidence, and it's hard. And change management during COVID was, you can imagine. So, yeah.
And Paul, I've seen you nodding through. I think both what Neil and Laura were saying.
Yeah, I think certainly, from my perspective, it's about that simplification piece. And I suppose the other area is, if you're moving from a legacy business to a more digitally focused business, just really understanding that the framework that you need to use for success is slightly different. So, print has been doing its thing for 100 years and largely unchanged, and there's some very successful brands who produce some amazing print publications. But I think when you're talking about a digital proposition, then you need to be really focused on what are the kind of key objectives. So for us, we use OKRs as a framework, as a goal-setting framework. So we could chase after any number of KPIs, success KPIs, but I think if you chase after too many, you become kind of unfocused. So I think that's one of the things that can stop businesses from growing as fast as they can. But I suppose I think I'm an optimist by nature, and I don't think there's that much that stops businesses from growing. I think the barriers to entry, the barriers to growth for digital transformation are low, and I think there's always something that businesses can do to grow their brand in the digital space. It is easier to do in many ways than some of the hurdles that exist in the print space.
I'm just hearing so much around focus and streamlining and kind of just keeping it simple for the teams, which is great. And Jonathan, I wanted to come to you next, just from a slightly different perspective, right? As a startup, a digital first brand, like how are legacy brands, or how are you competing with legacy brands? How are they competing with sort of digital-born brands?
So I think it's really interesting. I think the lines between legacy and digital are getting increasingly blurred. I think that obviously a lot of the legacy platforms are doing very well on digital. Look at the BBC News has now launched on TikTok. ITV did really well around I'm a Celebrity on TikTok. So they're definitely getting into that space. I think the main issue is that legacy brands see particularly social as a way of getting audiences back to their legacy product. And I think that is one of the biggest barriers certainly in content at the moment. And I think that's the real challenge for people in the digital space, to kind of come out there and start to tell stories and produce content that really works for the audiences on on those platforms, and that means changing storytelling, it means telling story selection and all of that kind of thing. Now the problem is that all this change in the market is on platforms which don't really drive any revenue. So there's a little bit of advertising revenue on social, but really that's not really where we get content from. So we're looking at really diversifying our income and looking at different ways of bringing in revenue, whether that be through events, whether it be through micropayments, whether it's opportunities to kind of build the brand, and I think that's what we're trying to do, and I think you will increasingly see this diversification, particularly in the news space, of people really trying to break into different areas.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting where you start with, where historically there has been that fear if users might leave your platform and go somewhere else, like will they come back? But what you're effectively saying is by making the content the draw itself, they will come back and they'll find you on the channel that works for them.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's really important. The future will be about building a brand and building brand loyalty, and that will be the future around how we achieve success. And that will be it. We just have to accept that we're not going to get that ad revenue that we had in the past.
But it's also, I think you make a really good point, just the content. What is the content that you're bringing, and what does that brand mean, so that people can, in a snap, right? They know this is actually what this brand represents from a content perspective, whereas a lot of time it's hard to tell. What is this channel, what is this channel, what is this publication, what is this publication? That's fascinating as people start to go after particular cohorts. Like I think about DAZN, if folks know how they've kind of come into the world here and really looking at a new way of doing the sporting model. It all comes back to, are you actually continuing evolving that content, like you said, and how does that link to your brand? And that is not an easy thing to do, because you have to constantly evolve, don't you? There's some new threat every day.
Always. Now, Paul, I want to come to you, because going back a question, you talked a little bit about some of the sort of friction that can build up between different sort of operating models and operating units. So how can media organisations sort of identify and deal with those friction points before they become too much?
Yeah, I guess we've seen that. I suppose having been in the industry for nearly 20 years and always looking at helping legacy media brands develop digital propositions. The frictions, I think, in the early days were really just about the legacy business wanting to kind of, I guess, milk that cash cow and not particularly kind of focus enough attention on the emerging business opportunity of digital. I think at The Sun, I would say we've done a really good job, because The Sun, I don't know if people know the story of The Sun, but in the early days of its foray into digital, it went behind a paywall. And actually, to their great credit, they pivoted out of that after a couple of years, and it was really when it became obvious that that wasn't the way to extend the reach of The Sun. The Sun's a mass market brand. It's a popular media brand, and we need to make sure that as many people as possible can read it. So that's quite a big kind of pivot for a brand as big as The Sun. And then since then, we've kind of been on this journey of really focusing and making The Sun, a fun brand that appeals, to your point, to a younger audience. And that does mean distributing across all of the social platforms, but it does also mean having a business model that means that we can fund that expansion. And over the last couple of years, actually, we've taken The Sun internationally. So we've launched in the US, and it's actually, I saw in the Press Gazette last week that it's the fastest growing media brand in the US. It's now the 20th biggest news media site in the US. So I think that goes to show that, legacy media brands, if once they get the digital formula right, they've got permission to kind of expand across borders. And I guess the other thing I'd say is that some people would say, being a legacy media brand, brings all of these kind of shackles and restrictions. We're bound by, IPSO, and we're bound by ASA and so forth. But I think the other side of that coin is that we're a brand that, when you come across us on social media, you realise that we cannot just make stuff up, because we'll be held to account. And I think that some of these digital-only brands can publish kind of with impunity on social media. And but I think the flip side of that is there is a kind of big question mark about trust of new brands, digital-only news brands. And I think that's why I would say the future is bright for many of these legacy media brands, Sun included, because we've got these kind of constraints around us, yet we've still got the kind of wide open opportunity that digital environment brings.
Can I just, you said something really profound there, and it just struck me that Disney's kind of a legacy media brand, possibly an entertainment brand, whichever way you want to call it. But if you look at what they've done since 2019, I think they're 138 million subscribers, something like that. Massive growth. How did they do that? Because that's your scaling point, yeah. And then you kind of look back and go, okay, they've been collecting data since 1959 across all their assets, whether it's theme parks, and then you go, okay, that's your formula. You get the data right, you scale quickly. I mean, that's a pretty impressive sort of Disney Plus launch. The results are outstanding, and it's kind of the formula that perhaps we should be looking at. So,
but also they did a couple acquisitions of key content that will make people want to go there. And I think what we saw a lot of is obviously we're all trapped in our houses. So all of a sudden, the ability for that feedback loop, it's so fascinating how many companies were ready to take advantage of that and ones that weren't. Back to your point about how am I planning for the future? How am I getting my infrastructure of humanity and technology ready to do that? So, because they're huge. So that could have actually been a total missed opportunity, but they did it.
You're not suggesting they planned COVID?
No.
Okay.
Oh my God, no.
That would be...
What did I say? Erase that. Move on, moving on.
But no, it's interesting because they weren't necessarily the first to move as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
They waited until they had everything lined up and ready to go. And I think it's interesting what Paul was talking about, recognizing that, taking the time, maybe recognizing a decision you've made isn't always the right decision. I feel like that ability to change, you don't always think about that in big media operations, entertainment operations.
I think that's a really important point. This ability to remain agile is going to be really important in the future. And we joked about COVID, but look at Tortoise Media, who set themselves up as essentially as an events business, and that business model was completely destroyed by COVID. So they've actually kind of pivoted, and they're now an audio business, and doing quite well out of that. And I think that that ability to remain agile is going to be really important. We're going to have a conversation about TikTok. We probably wouldn't have had that 2 years ago. It was not somewhere that was really in the sort of brand content space, but it is absolutely in the space now. So and we don't know what's around the corner, so we need to prepare for that. And I think that is the key thing for businesses to survive.
It's almost like my questions. Like that really leads me on really nicely to what I want to call on Lauren to speak about a little bit first. Which is really around how media organizations can diversify. How can they seek out or be ready for these growth opportunities?
So I'll give a couple perspectives from obviously being in a media agency, and then also some of my friends and family in the publisher side, but I definitely encourage everyone, please build on this. The thing that's most profound to me right now is that we're at a point where, because digital behaviors of all consumers has changed so drastically, and now there's a lot of technology that's available to capture and analyze data, cookies going away, all of a sudden everyone's kind of running after first-party data, which talk about that logged-in wall and so forth. So now you have retailers saying, I'm in the game, right? So the retail media, elephant in the room is huge, right? It's growing to 100 billion. You have it equaling 11 to 14% of spend these days. And I know we're working with a lot of the retailers, helping them build up their ad networks. At the same time, you have telcos doing the same thing, and you also have banks looking to do that. So all of a sudden, you're in this world of incredible competition for who has the eyeballs, who has the content, and who's actually getting the brands to give them some data. So that's one area that is just, oh my God. The next one is around, I think, the agencies starting to pivot to e-commerce and recognizing again that how are you using media on your own platforms in a different way to actually drive attention to your own brand. So we have certain clients who are actually moving to, I want to own the topic fun, back to the point of like the content and the brand. So if I own fun, I happen to own these bars, these restaurants, these specialty areas. I'm in all of these different pubs. How can I actually create an experience now that, whether it be e-com or an app or some sort of other thing we haven't invented yet, how can the brands get closer? So I think it's quite fascinating how everyone's trying to enter in as, I have some inventory to trade, come give me your money. And it's nuts for a CMO, or more importantly a CGO, who's looking at a trade promotion budget and then a marketing budget. That's one area. On the publisher side, what I've seen over the past 4 years, and I think my esteemed colleagues here have been watching this too, is the publishers, especially one of my friends who's running one in Belgium, he was saying they were one of the first movers to help smaller companies actually manage these ID graphs as a service. So I do think there's an opportunity for publishers to say, I have the technology apparatus, why don't you use my tech? And it actually creates a different business model where you can sit on mine and I'll help you move your audiences around. You can't afford all that tech. So I think that's another area that with every opportunity of a threat, there's an opportunity to kind of change and find a new revenue stream.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And just to build on the data point, I think, we've been talking about the value of data and data's new gold and all this sort of stuff.
One more person says data is oil.
Oil
he did it. He avoided it. It's the platinum.
But I think you're right. But I think the key point that publishers, whether they're big or small, need to consider when it comes to data is, you can put any amount of infrastructure in, but it's really the execution of that data, I think, that means that you're going to be able to profit from it. And I think the idea that all data is kind of super valuable is probably not true. We have 6.5 million people a day coming to thesun.co.uk, and the reality is that some of those readers are going to be really valuable. Some of them are just going to be snacking on content and they're going to be gone. And actually, the data profile that we can capture, we've got to focus on the ones that are likely for us to be able to make something of that data, to whether to trade it into ad exchanges or to capture it for our own use or whatever it might be. And I think the point about data is that perhaps as legacy businesses, we think of data as kind of, gold coins or whatever you want to call it. But I think the reality is that it's probably more like a highly perishable fruit. So you don't have long to capture that data, process it, and activate it. And that timescale may be as little as an hour or 2 hours. It's definitely not 2 years or a year even. And so I think that's one of the key things that we're looking at on the Sun and more broadly across News UK is capturing that data, profiling it on the way in, and then activating it kind of very quickly. So we pass all that information into Nucleus, which is our data engine, if you like, and then we make sure that it can be passed out to the relevant business department for activation quickly. I think that's the kind of key point I would make on data.
Yeah,
but I think it's
not all data is created equal.
Correct.
You don't need. It's like you don't need to fill up the giant vat. It's like if you have this 7 attributes, that's sometimes enough because it's how fast can you use it.
Exactly.
Neil, you surely have something to say about this now.
Yeah, I have.
We talked about this for.
I could go on forever. Look, I'd just reiterate the points. When I was at News Australia, actually, we had a huge chance to really invest in that as, data as an asset, and we took a very programmatic approach to it, and we referred to it as AAA, like authenticated, addressable, and then active. And those were our data points to actually build up the asset over time, and we could see the exponential value once you actually build that asset up in that kind of categorization. Then that stuff's good. That stuff's less good. It's still useful. And I think sometimes demystifying what you have to do to get there really helps people around the business understand how this functional disalignment that we talked about earlier can actually power the next iteration of your business model. But going back to your KPI point right at the beginning, unless that is KPI'd right from the top, mandated, CFO, CEO, whatever, it's always going to be friction in that collection, usage, activation. On top of that, there's 1,000 different sort of legislation kind of issues around data. So there's friction in how you build that anyway. But start small and then build up and prove it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It comes back to some of the earlier points as well about users move to platforms, users move to content before advertiser dollars do. And so actually, if you've got this data, if you've got leadership that is invested in reading the data,
Yeah.
learning from the data, then actually you can start to do this diversification and get ready for the growth before it's sort of there. I'm going to just give...
Can I just say one more quote, which I love, sorry to bang on, but Brian Chesky, he talks about lots of great things. He goes, love first, then grow. So how you treat that data around the consumer is really important. So that, I think we talked about customer experience earlier. I think that's got to be your North Star, which, sorry to use that phrase, in any organisation to make sure you respect how you use it.
I think that's an interesting point because at the news movement, where we are unashamedly targeting Gen Z audiences with our content, the data is obviously something which we can package up and use in a commercial environment, but it also really informs our content. And that's got to be first. It's a content-first strategy, so make sure that we're absolutely making decisions based on the data that we see.
Now I'm just going to give a heads up to the audience that I'm going to be coming to you guys for some questions for our panel next. I have one more question though first, and maybe Neil, you can kick us off with this because it sort of ties into the last point as well. But I'm kind of keen to talk a bit more about future-proofing. Right, we're here today, predominantly publisher audience. What can media owners future-proof in the context of the sort of changing macroeconomic climate? Like, how can you get ready for what is coming?
Yeah, I'd start with I call it connected enterprise mentality. Getting all those functional heads around the same goal. And that's way harder than it says, because you're actually breaking down all that friction we talked about earlier about which way does the business need to go. And the best way that we have this problem all the time with our customers who are like, look, this is where I want to go, how can you help us get there? And we start with that, and then we showcase, we've got quite a large enterprise base, about 150,000 customers. We take them out of their world and we get them thinking about comparatives, not competitors, comparatives, because it's very easy to just focus on your own world when you're looking at diversification strategies or you're looking at, experience with content. And a good case in point for media, we'll take them into travel and entertainment. We'll show them what luxury hotels do with good data. And we make them feel it and we make them, touch it because it's all very personal and they get, okay, so that's how we can think about how we approach this problem. And as soon as you get that penny drop moment, that's the good thing. Second thing, and MIT, Sloan do a good piece on this. They talk about the power of platform. And, I had the luxury and also the pain of working at a scale-up business e-commerce scale-up business in the States. And we were able to grow really, really quickly. In fact, 4 years of 100% growth was a cracking pace. We're able to do that for one reason only, because we had one operating platform to operate from. Finance, everything was on the same platform. Billing, it was the same platform our customers experienced. And so that scalability was really good. And the MIT Sloan piece talks about, platforms and non-platform businesses have the same propensity to grow, but the fact is that friction is reduced on the one platform businesses, and they do it at half the cost. So because they have half as many people involved in growing a business, because the platform gets rid of all the friction. So I'll be any kind of point I'll be making sure your CFO is at the table driving a change to see the economic benefits of simplifying your business, aligning the KPIs, aligning the direction, and getting agile, as you said. It's a CFO, CEO-led conversation. I feel really, for any sales leads or marketing leads who are here today, if you're not operating with that agility because you haven't got the infrastructure to do so, you're going to find it really hard. And no one wants to do hard jobs. They want to do jobs they love.
Lauren, that sounds like a lot of what you were saying.
Yeah.
You went through from the COO perspective.
Oh,
did you pull those stakeholders in?
Yes, we had, we had an incredible aha moment where we looked at some massive inefficiency in the targets we were supposed to hit and said, yeah, this isn't happening. And then there's some other shocker moments that said, okay, restructuring time. And that's where everything from the board down, Dentsu being owned by a Japanese parent company, was pretty much, we have to streamline, we have to go to one platform, we have to take that tough decision. And it's so hard because Dentsu, Aegis as it was very much around, we want to empower the people we've acquired who've brought their teams, who've brought their craft, who've brought something that's unique that we think adds to the community of Dentsu, but now we have to transform into something new. And it's so similar at Accenture Song, being part of this, I call it the mothership, and I'm like, I'm in the song part, not the mothership part. And we're going through the same thing where it's pretty much all of these different agencies who had their ways of working are now saying, oh, there's someone like me who does this in another country with a slightly different lens, but at least we're operating off of that same idea of what is the platform that we're actually using. And that's more for, like, let's say the operational side of things, but overall, if you don't have, like you said, the CEO and the CFO, and it almost has to be that moment, right? I mean, you've probably seen it in your multiple iterations. They have to have that moment where they say, I'm going to invest and we're going to do tops down governance, everyone's in line, and there's some people who may choose, to make some decisions as a result of that to not be on board.
Yeah, what you're saying there is really interesting, and I think the other point I would sort of add on top of it is about thinking more collaboratively, just as a sort of operating strategy. So for us in the publishing world, I think news media brands of old were very focused on their brand of news, their audience, and kind of almost sort of a little bit tunnel visioned around it. For us now, we've got a fantastic opportunity to collaborate with our audience, to allow them to participate with us, and then to reach out and find other influencers or other writers to kind of work alongside. And actually that collaboration can grow the pie because we're not really focused on a particular brand of kind of content.
Yeah.
So I think collaboration really brings new growth opportunities as well.
Is it collaboration with sorry, I'm going to do it again, but North Star, or is sort of, how does that piece work?
So I think it's just looking around, again, outside of your kind of normal kind of sphere or ecosystem and saying, what else is happening? What do the audience want? To your point, Jonathan, right at the beginning, what do the audience want? And how can we help bring more of that stuff to them? And we're a big brand, and of course we've got a load of writers. We write 400 to 500 stories a day. But actually, why can't that be 800 or 900 stories a day? And those extra stories are curated and brought in to our platform by others. And so I think that's just a fresh way of looking at it. Would we have invited influencers to write in the Sun in print 20 years ago? Probably not. But today, that's definitely something that not only we would consider, but we're actively doing it. So we've recently kind of set up a partnership with a content agency who write in a segment that we just don't really focus on. And actually, it's early days, but it's proven to be really successful. So we're amplifying their content, and we're bringing fresh new content to our readers who are interested in our case gaming, and that's going really well. So that's a kind of nice example of collaboration and growing the brand and growing the proposition.
It's like future-proofing through innovation, Jonathan.
I think it's a really interesting point because the digital experience, the social experience, is a much more intimate experience now, and people are choosing brands because they say something about themselves. And whether it's a legacy brand or a new digital brand, by actively going out and consuming content in certain areas, they are having a reflection of themselves. So you can do hard brand work around your core brand, but cooking up with influencers is kind of like a soft brand work. Who are the people that share our values, share our thoughts and concerns about the world, and work with those people, because I think that is increasingly how you're going to build the engagement with consumers, because it is such a much more intimate experience than we had from the world of broadcasting.
But I think it's also setting a tone, because the interesting thing is there's some folks who are very happy with the way it was before, and so you have to find ways to celebrate that collaboration. And I think that's the thing I've seen now for the past 3 years is you have the folks who want to try to do this, the folks that aren't really sure, and the folks who definitely don't want to. And I think it's trying to create that space from a management down to create the tone of, this is amazing, be part of the future, be part of the change. And that is hard in COVID. It's getting easier now. We're literally getting people in the room and saying, how can we crack this? How can we think differently? How can we put the consumer in the empty chair, right, around the table and say, what can we do that's new? But also giving people the space for that. So looking at their own personal KPIs and saying, how can I change the KPIs of these teams so they work together? And I think we all know that's the biggest thing. It's like, how do these teams work together? Well, it's changing the KPIs, so it's collaboration, not silos. And again, that's another bit that getting back to the right KPI, not too many. So just wanted to add that as a practical maybe action.
Thank you, and I think that's a brilliant. On the topic of collaboration, let's open it up to the floor. Do we have any questions here this morning? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Anna Sampson, media tech columnist and independent consultant. My background is research and insights. I'm used to dealing with different data to the type of data you've been talking about today. But I've just got a question about the data that you work with. So I'm used to kind of dealing with data that might contradict each other. So my background is working with media agencies. I might be looking at econometric data or survey data and that type of thing. And so when you encounter, the first question is, do you encounter contradiction in your data? And then what do you do about that?
I'll repeat the question just in case anyone didn't hear it. So do you encounter contradictions in your data? And if you do, what do you do about it? Thank you for the question.
No worries.
We've written a piece on this. We call it kind of life centricity and the human paradox. Is that what's happening is people say they're sustainable, but then they're getting 7 boxes of shoes sent to their house. And so it's kind of this understanding of we do have these things that are occurring, and people will say one thing and do something else. They'll take a flight across the transatlantic, but they'll ride their bike to work. So we see a lot of the paradox happening through the survey research we do. We're doing a lot of NLP around ratings and reviews and social to understand what are people actually saying about different brands and different attitudes. So when we see it, we just have to kind of put it in context and say, where do we actually take an action, and where is it just humans are just paradoxical and there's not much we can do about that. So how do we even train them? So I think especially with sustainability being such a key issue right now, helping people actually realize when you make this choice, do you know you're maybe not being as sustainable as you think you are? So I think it's a bit about how we do behavioral change. But I mean, when this is over, I'd love to chat with you. We did some work with COVID in Colombia that was quite interesting on changing behaviors to wearing masks, and there was lots of contradictions in that one.
I'd also be really interested to hear from anyone else, because I think one of the main challenges for media owners is this, from an organisational perspective, resource to tackle something like complexity of data contradiction. And Accenture is quite resource rich.
Yeah, we're at 800,000
So
now. Yikes.
a discipline around kind of how do you hold on to the talent that can deal with that? Because I think data businesses are really good at process, but it's not a process question. It's an element of human in the room, understanding that and having people who can to deal with that. So within one of the things you've been talking about is organisational change, M&A activity, and how do you deal with that within your organisation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I don't think it's got an easy answer, but something that I could offer would be that we see it all the time, right? And I think sometimes you just have to be able to hold two truths. So that is true for this cohort of people, this is true for that cohort of people, or the data is a bit messy kind of in the middle. I guess one of the ways that we can try and address that, and I guess we're privileged in this way, is that we can ask, for clarification. So, if you imagine, we've got this huge kind of top of funnel. If we say, what do you think about this? So we can ask the audience to kind of participate and kind of clear it up for us, or not, or say this is a polarizing thing. The data says this and that, and I think that's one of the ways that media owners in particular can harness their audience in a new way and get them to participate and to contribute. And I think that's a really kind of positive opportunity to help, unknot that problem.
I think we've got one more question as well in the back. Yeah.
From the Media Leader. Is the mic working? I am really interested with what you guys have been saying, and I just wondered what you thought. The AOP had a study that said that diversifying revenue streams was a priority for all publishers, was like the top priority. Just wonder how you guys think about how do you diversify your revenue streams like newsletters, online, what have you, without spreading yourself too thin or putting all your eggs in one basket?
I think ultimately it's about staying true to your values and your core mission. So in terms of content production, that's got to kind of be at the center of everything you do. So whether you're doing a newsletter or an event or social content, it's got to stick to that so that the brand values kind of stick out. And I think that keeping that at the core of every decision-making process is really important, because it's back to what I was saying earlier about that more intimate experience with your audience, and I think that just keeping that at the centre of the thought is really, really important.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think that's we're going to wrap up here, because I'm getting a lot of time kind of messages, because we have other content starting in the main room very, very shortly now. It just comes to me to say thank you to all of the panelists this morning. You've been brilliant. The insights have been really coming out thick and fast. So I think hopefully everyone's got some really good actionable takeaways from this morning. Thank you.